Hello, welcome back to Introduction to Early Childhood Education. We're going to talk about the environment in this lecture. Let me share my screen with you. All right, so you should be seeing that PowerPoint now. Um, we're really looking at how to create those environments. So how to set up your classroom, how to include all of the things that you need, how to make sure it's safe for the children, how to make sure that you have everything that you need and enough of everything for the number of children in your class. As we go through, you're going to see some images on each of these slides with just a picture of a classroom environment. So take some time to stop and look at that environment and think about what you're seeing. Ask yourself what you're picking up on. What are some things that are really good about that environment? What are some things that maybe need to be changed? Okay, so just as we go through, just take the time to look at that. When you're going out on observations, notice the environment, how it's set up, what things are included, what centers are there. When you if you're working in your own classroom or maybe you're like a floater and you're working in a few different classrooms, just pay attention to what you're seeing and make some comparisons. All right. Our objectives outline the major criteria that are used in creating a developmentally appropriate learning environment. So what is it about the environment that we need to look at to make sure that it's appropriate for the age we're working with, the developmental level we're working with, and also like, is it culturally appropriate or responsive? Okay. Examine the central elements of children's health, safety, and well-being when planning the environments. Do we have things set up to where the children are safe and healthy? Are we disinfecting like we should? Do we have that set up appropriately? Um, are the exits open or do we have stuff in the way that might block that and cause a safety issue? Do we have our tall bookshelves anchored to the walls so there's no chance of a child climbing the shelf and then the shelf falling on them? Think about all of those things when you're looking at the environments that you are working in or observing in. Okay. Analyze basic arrangements and materials for the physical, temporal, and interpersonal aspects of the environment. So look at the physical environment, right? Like what does it look like? What does it feel like? What's included? And then look at the temporal aspect. Like look at your daily schedule and each time of the day. Is your environment appropriate for that? Do you have an environment that's set up that's appropriate for meals if you're eating in the classroom, for napping if you're napping in the classroom? Is your gross motor play set up appropriately? And also take a look at outside your playground. Is that appropriate? So there's different times of day. That's what we're talking about when we say temporal. It's just the different times and um, is it appropriate for all of the things that we have to do in the classroom? And then interpersonal aspects like those relationships between us and the children, between the children and each other, between us and the other adults in the classroom. So we want to make sure that we're always looking at everything that's going to impact the children in the classroom. All right, so criteria for creating environments. And notice this image looks very different than the last classroom that we looked at. This is for a little bit older children, very different setup. Um, take notice of where the door is and how it's kind of blocked. We don't know if that's an emergency door or not, but that would be something to really consider. So what are the criteria? The environment is the stage on which children play out the themes of childhood, their interests, their triumphs, problems, and concerns. So that's a quote from your textbook that I put in there. It really is so important that our environment is appropriate and inclusive. So just really pay attention to what you're seeing when you're looking at different environments. Montessori, Vygotsky, Malaguzzi have all influenced environment through settings and material, and each of those classrooms would look very different. Remember, Malaguzzi is the person who started the Reggio Emilia program, so it's more art-based, and the environment shows that. Vygotsky is more about cultural aspect, and so it's those environments show that. Montessori classrooms are more about teaching children self-help skills and working individually and in maybe a pair. And those classrooms show that. Okay. Locally, we have most of our classrooms are kind of an eclectic mix of the different theories, right? The way that we would set up our classrooms. But something to think about when you're observing. Definitions and characteristics. The environment is the sum total of the physical and human qualities that combine to create a space in which children and adults work and play together. So it's the physical environment, what the classroom setup is like, what's in the classroom, but it's also what we as teachers bring to the classroom. It's also what the other children bring to the classroom and how we work together to create an appropriate, positive, welcoming, hopefully, environment. We look at the physical environment, the temporal environment, the interpersonal environment. The environment really is the child's third teacher. If we have our classroom set up appropriately and we have what we need and enough of what we need, it really does cut back on some of those behavioral issues that we may see. Something to think about. Characteristics, we should have a prepared environment. It should convey a welcoming feeling. Anytime you go into a classroom, you should feel comfortable and welcomed and like it's a space you would want to spend time in. That's what we want our children to feel. It should give clear clues on what can be done. So what are the separate areas or centers, and what's the purpose of each of those? It should be clear just by looking at it what can be done in each of those areas. Provide spaces for concentration and lively play. So we want to pay attention to things like where's the block area, where's the quiet area or the reading area. Those should be, because that's the loudest and the quietest, those should be as far apart as possible within the classroom. So just some different things we need to consider when we're setting up our environment. Group size, it's the most important indicator of a quality program, a quality classroom, right? If we have smaller groups, smaller numbers of children in a classroom, and then a smaller ratio as well, that's better quality, right? If we have a whole bunch of children in a classroom and we're barely at ratio or we're over ratio, which is never good, right? That's an indicator that this is probably not a quality place to have our children spend time. All right, definitions and characteristics. When planning the environment, consider the physical plan. Consider it from a child's perspective. When you're arranging your classroom, I recommend that you get down on your knees and look at it from the child's level. So you can really see their perspective. Do we have things up too high? Are things within reach? Are they safe for children? Resources, how can you stretch your budget? And this is always tricky. We typically have very limited budgets. We may get to submit a wish list at the beginning of the year or at the end of the year for the following year. And we sometimes get some or most of what's on there, but sometimes not, depending on the budget that year. So what can we do to stretch our budget? So I think this is kind of interesting how we have in the image there that I just found these pictures online. Okay, they're just random pictures. But they have stretched their budget by using milk crates and sewing a cushion for those to use for their seating rather than going to the expense of buying like child size comfortable chairs and things like that. So it's sometimes we have to think outside the box and we want our classroom to look a certain way, but we don't necessarily have the funds for the supplies. So how can we still make that happen, but on a smaller budget or sometimes even no budget? Okay. Program goals, the goals and the environment should work together, whatever, you know, our program goals and, you know, philosophical thinking is, it should match our environment. The goals should be put into action. So goals for each environment, the physical, the temporal, the interpersonal, we should be making those goals and planning our activities around those, but also planning our environment around those. Developmentally appropriate learning environments. We need to create brain compatible environments, making sure that children have a space where it's conducive to thinking and cognitive development. Build culturally responsive environments, make sure they're inclusive, incorporate play in the environment, in the daily experiences and interactions. And most of us know that play is very important, that we need to include that. Where we fall short is the amount of time. We need to be providing a lot more time for pure play than what we typically see in our classrooms. Something to consider when you're doing your observations. Consider the children's developmental levels, and we may have children of all different levels, right, in the same classroom. Give families ways to identify their child's space, provide access to enough toys and materials, give opportunities for making choices, and see the children are responsible for caring for the environment. Cleanup time can be a little bit hectic. It can be a time of day when we see more behavioral issues. So we need to look at that and what our expectations are and how we're communicating with children during that time. Really think about what you're seeing and what you're doing if you're working in the classroom. We don't want to do the work for the children, right? We need to help them learn how to clean up after themselves and be good stewards, you know, take care of the materials, clean up the paintbrushes and the messes and all of that. But also we should not just be standing there directing them, right? We should be working with them to clean up and showing them and making that a real team effort to get the space cleaned up before we go on to the next activity. Involve children in planning and setting up the environment. This gives them more ownership of the environment, and then they will take better care of it. And there, of course, are things that we can't allow them to help to choose, and there are things that we have to do, ways that we have to set up certain things based on our classroom size or the shape of our classroom, or sometimes our program requirements. But in as much as we can, we should be allowing children to help plan out some of those things based on their interests. Provide children with enough time. We never give them enough time to play, and we need to do better about that. We usually have a lot of goals, a lot of things that we're required to do, and how can we squeeze in enough just pure play time for them and still get everything else completed? So it's something to really think about, really look at your schedule and figure out ways to plan an appropriate amount of playtime for children. Let children teach one another. They're really good at scaffolding, especially if you have a mixed age classroom where you have 3s, 4s, and 5s all in the same classroom. They will help each other. And the older children learn from the younger children to kind of be more patient, to be more empathetic, things like that. So it's really is a back and forth learning opportunity. Accept children's efforts. They're not going to clean up a mess the way that we clean up a mess, and we need to accept that. they do their best, and then we clean up behind them if we have to, but if they're making an effort, like an honest effort, we need to praise them for that, thank them for that specific praise, right? Um, make the environment safe, a safe place to make a mistake. If we spill a glass of milk at the lunch table, it should not be the end of the world. We should not be worried that we're going to get in trouble for making a mistake. Accidents happen, right? Children are learning. They're learning how to hold things, balance things. This will all come in time, but we need to make it a safe place so that they can learn from the mistakes that they make rather than just be worried they're going to get in trouble. Okay. Give credit where it's due, offer specific praise, right? And that goes for the rest of your education staff as well as the children in your classroom. Include beauty in your planning. We want our space to be beautiful and welcoming and someplace that the children want to be, right? It's wonderful if we have a space that has all the windows and all the natural lighting. We don't always get that choice. So think about how else we can plan for our environment to be beautiful and welcoming. Okay. All right. I think that we will pause our lecture here and we'll pick up with some more developmentally appropriate practices in the next lecture. So if you need a break, go ahead and take a break. If you don't, just go ahead and pop right into the next lecture and I will see you there.